Audioboom posts a profit. The latest from Podnews.net with Podpage. Build a beautiful podcast website in 5 minutes. A few hours ago, Audioboom released its 2021 results to the stock market. The company made its first net profit of $1.4 million versus a loss of $3.3 million last year. And revenue was up 125% year-on-year. Stuart Last, the CEO, said achieving profitability on both an adjusted EBITDA and net basis is transformative, establishing a self-sustaining business funded for continued growth. Podcasting hasn't produced a new hit in years, claims Bloomberg, pointing to Edison Research's data, which suggests that none of the top 25 most popular podcasts in the US are less than 2 years old. Rate This Podcast, which offers a simple link to help your listeners rate your show, now supports Spotify. The company also says that more than 3,500 podcasters have signed up to use the tool. You can have a look at how it looks at ratethispodcast.com/podnews. Give us a rating while you're there. The Black and Brown Podcast Collective has announced a new initiative to increase the number of culturally competent reviews from individuals. Podcasts will be evaluated in 5 categories: originality, production, consistency, creativity, and overall content. Puma Podcast, a Philippine podcast publisher, had an audience study conducted for them by Splice Media. It's posted online, and a fascinating look at how podcast listeners really want to interact with their favourite shows. AI voice clones could be hosting podcasts in the future, suggest Pacific Content. We used an AI voice clone for our podcast in July 2020. An anti-vaccine podcaster has died of COVID-19. Doug Kuzma was 61 and spread conspiracy theories about the vaccine. Friends don't let friends listen to podcast apps on default settings, claims Eric Jones on the Bellow Collective, highlighting the benefit of volume boost, intelligent speed control, and other features. Why and how has podcasting been destroying commercial radio, asks Tom Webster in his latest newsletter, and registration is open for the Africa Podcast Day 2022 festival. It's to be held online on February the 12th. In People News, E.B. Moss has been hired as SVP of Content and Community for Marketing Community Brand Innovators. Within podcasting, she's a frequent moderator at industry conferences and programmed NatP's Content Cast, which I spoke at. Annabelle Wilkin has just been announced as Head of Branded Podcasts for Something Else, part of Sony Music Entertainment. She'd previously been at Spotify. It's a Monday, so time for some tech stuff. The podcast live item tag has been formalized, which will allow podcast apps to alert you when your favorite podcast is available in a live stream. It allows a schedule as well as instant messaging that a live stream has started. It's worth a look. Benjamin Bellamy has written more about the podcast font and how to use it. We've also switched to using its play and pause icons throughout our website. It's also added a lot more icons too, if you haven't seen it. And Radio Cut, a podcast and radio clipping service, now sets a best practice RSS user agent of Radio Cut /1.0. They were previously using a library default. It's been added to the open OPORG list. And in podcast news, The Gay Agenda has been launched by Netflix, its first LGBTQ+ podcast, produced by Most, the home of LGBTQ+ storytelling. Marvel's Wastelanders Black Widow launches today. It's a 10-episode scripted podcast starring Susan Sarandon as Helen Black. We all know the story about Martin Luther King, assassinated by lone gunman James Earl Ray in 1968. The MLK tapes begs to differ. With rare recordings and never heard before testimonies, you might agree with the King family that it isn't all quite as cut and dry as it seems. This Is Dating is a new dating show where 4 singles are set up with potential matches. You'll eavesdrop into their dates, the good, the bad and the awkward, and hear how they're getting on. From dating coach Logan Uri and the show's and the date's producers. It's produced by Magnificent Noise and already acclaimed as a standout show for 2022. It launches today. Rick Edelman is the US's most acclaimed financial advisor, apparently, and the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 10 books on personal finance. The Truth About Your Future with Rick Edelman is his new podcast and syndicated radio show. It was launched on January the 1st. Netflix, Audacy's Pineapple Street Studios and Hyper Object Industries have launched The Last Movie Ever Made, the Don't Look Up podcast. It's a 6-part oral history of the making of Don't Look Up. It launched on Friday. On 3 clips by Castos, podcasters behind some of the world's most creative shows deconstruct their work a few pieces at a time. A new season brings a new host, Evo Terra, and the first episode is with Michael Trippiani of the podcast How to Start a War. And states in the American West have some of the highest teen suicide and juvenile incarceration rates in the nation. For decades, Wyoming has been among the worst on both fronts. The Modern West looks into how children are raised in the American West in a new 3-part series from Wyoming Public Media and PRX. This podcast is brought to you by Podpage. The one thing every good podcast needs is a website, and Podpage lets you build one for free. You don't need to know any coding or anything like that. You can customize the design. You can add a mailing list or a contact form. It does episode pages and all of that stuff. You can use it for free at podpage.com and upgrade to more features. Go to podpage.com/podnews to get started. And that's the latest from our newsletter. For all the links, we're at podnews.net.